Hello, everyone, and welcome to Black Kids in Outer Space. Today, I have a person that I found quite fascinating online and just in the revolutionary movement. I have Chris Winston. He's a St. Louis-based Marxist, Leninist, Maoist activist and organizer for the People St. Louis and the organizing committee for a Maoist Communist Party. He holds a BA in African American Studies from St. Louis University and writes regularly on Medium under the name Black Red Guard. So thank you so much for coming to Black Kids in Outer Space. It's just exciting to have you here. So I have like a question, kind of a big question.
Sure.
So first, actually, it's not a really big question, but what's your first memory of space?
Space, like outer space?
It could be whatever. It could be like outside, your environment, whatever.
Well, I grew up in a city like most African American, well,
Mm-hmm.
new African or black people in the United States did. And in the city we have so many lights like you can't see the stars. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when I was like 10, we went to the country for a hayride. It was around Halloween time, and
Mm-hmm.
I looked up in the sky and I was like, wow. Because we live in a city, like we have so many
Mm-hmm.
lights, and we can't see the stars. We can't see nature like that. I mean, we see possums, raccoons, other weird stuff that goes to the dumpsters, but we cannot see the
Mm-hmm.
stars. And it was like, that sense of childhood wonder is like, wow. And see, that's my first memory of seeing like space, or seeing like the
Mm-hmm.
actual nighttime sky. But I was like, wow, this is fucking cool.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have in St. Louis, we have the St. Louis Science Center, and they have like
Mm-hmm.
this really really cool planetarium type thing there. Like you can go and I mean, it's really really important for kids that grew up in urban areas to go out and experience nature and stuff like that, because as you know, capitalism is destroying all of this stuff. Like it's blotting out everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
destroying our natural heritage as human beings. And part of the reason why I adopted Marxism, Leninism, Maoism as my guiding ideology, and I encourage other people to do so as well, is because the Maoist movement in India is actually at the forefront of organizing indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
The indigenous people of India, and fighting against these giant mining companies,
Mm-hmm.
ArcelorMittal, these types of companies that are destroying their natural environment. These people have lived like this for thousands of years. They're living in an environmentally sustainable fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
these giant multinational conglomerates are destroying the forests to get access to the ores and minerals that are underneath these forests. And the
Mm-hmm.
Marxist Leninist Maoist movement in India is actively struggling against the attempts of these corporations to decimate the natural heritage of the indigenous people of India, also called the Adivasi people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think something's interesting. We have a comment that says in LA, when it was during the blackout, when people saw the Milky Way for the first time, they called the police because of of light pollution.
That's just sad. That's just sad
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
people are being so alienated from. You shouldn't have to go 2 or 3 or 4 miles. I mean, 400 miles outside of any major urban area, or go to a national park to be able to experience nature as it was intended. I'm by no means an anarcho primitivist or anything like that. I'm not a tree hugging hippie or anything like that. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying,
Mm-hmm.
if we build over everything, where are we going to go to breathe? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at pictures from New York or St. Louis or Chicago or LA from the 1970s, before they implemented controls on the amount of gas, I mean, on the type of gas that the car could use to try to cut back on smog, that was horrible looking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why
Mm-hmm.
a lot of older people have all these respiratory conditions and stuff like that, because they went through their childhood, adolescent, early adult years breathing in all this shit. Like it used to be, you couldn't even see in New York. You couldn't even see that well because all the shit was being thrown up in the air.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But going back to a Maoist perspective, it's really, really ridiculous to expect the capitalists to stop making money for themselves at everybody else's expense, at the planet's expense. We have to have socialism. If our planet is not going to, well, our planet is very, very resilient. We as a species are not very, very resilient. So if we kill each other off with our own stupidity and our own greed, and it's not our own greed, it's the greed of a small fraction of the population. If we let them kill us all off with their greed, the Earth may recover in 500 years, but we'll be dead as a species. So this is really, socialism is not just a parlor trick or something that you want to discuss amongst your friends. It's an urgent necessity. And that's why it's important that we go so hard in propagating revolutionary theory, revolutionary practice, actually trying to see socialism in our lifetime, actually turning socialism from a buzzword or a something that you talk about on Left Book, which I absolutely despise, and turn socialism into an active reality. We have to overthrow the capitalist system with force of arms, otherwise we as a species will not survive.
I have to say that was probably like one of the most insightful answers to that question. And you're not an environmentalist, like that's not your field. So it's kind of like interesting that you gave that kind of like political, environmental, personal perspective. I always kind of like putting that out there and see what people say. So it's always interesting. Now I have another kind of like, what is a revolution to you? What's a revolution to you?
A revolution in Maoist sense is an armed overthrow of one class by another. And a lot of people that see a revolution as a coup, okay, we're going to go take City Hall. We're going to go take the White. No. Because you have to mobilize the masses. By the masses, we mean the basic masses in the United States, the working class, particularly the Black and Latino working class, the indigenous working class, to topple the system of U.S. capitalism, imperialism. And when you talk to people that have been making revolutions in other parts of the world, the Philippines, India, Peru, Turkey, the best thing that, and that going way back in the day, the Vietnamese and the Cubans, they wanted us to do the same thing. Stop sniffing our farts. I'm sorry to use that term. and make revolution in the United States. Che Guevara said that he was very, very envious of people that lived in North America, because we live in the belly of the beast. And Mao teaches, in our contradiction, that a change in anything, in a person, in a society, in an organization, in a business, what have you, is internal. People say that, oh, they did this to me. This happened to you because something within you internally was flawed, rotten, and then labeled this external contradiction, this external force to push on you. And this combination of internal and external factors led to defeat or victory. So we as Black people, as oppressed people, as working class people in the United States, we are in a very, very enviable position, because we do not have anything to gain from the continued existence of the society which dragged our ancestors over here 400, 300 years ago, enslaved us. They used us to build up this country. And to this day, we still have to march throughout the streets saying Black Lives Matter, despite building everything in this country. So we as a people, as the new African oppressed nation, have no reason whatsoever to continue to allow this to exist. We get nothing from America that we have not fought for with our own blood, sweat, and tears. And even after this blood, sweat, and tears, if we embrace revisionism or reformism, if we do not go all the way towards socialism, towards communism, if we let weakness within ourselves, weakness within our ideology, rot our revolution from the inside, we will fail. That is why I constantly try to apply Marxism, Leninism, Maoism on the American terrain, particularly from the terrain of the new African people. So a revolution to me, go back to your original point, a revolution to me is I follow Mao on this. A revolution is not peaceful. It's not a dinner party. It's not a tea party. It is a violent overthrow of one class by another.
And does that mean necessarily physical violence? Like, what do we mean by violence in regards to? I mean, I know that's like maybe like a really easy question, but what do you mean by violence?
Well, let's just engage in a hypothetical here, okay? A
Mm-hmm.
revolution, the socialist revolution, entails, or a national liberation revolution entails a displacement of the colonizer or a displacement of the bourgeoisie, what have you. So
Mm-hmm.
people that have gotten themselves into these positions by violence, okay, because
Mm-hmm.
Africa wasn't colonized peacefully. The United
Mm-hmm.
States wasn't
Mm-hmm.
taken peacefully. Slaves weren't taken peacefully. So
Mm-hmm.
if somebody is willing to, and to this day, they still engage in horrendous acts of violence
Mm-hmm.
against us as a people, against our brothers or sisters in the Caribbean, in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
against our diaspora in Europe. And a system that is willing to incarcerate an entire nation of people or maintain us in a state of decrepitude, they're willing to do this with brutal violence. It's sort of, I'm not going to say naive, but it's sort of ridiculous to claim that um, these people will get up off this stuff that they've whipped and shot out of us and the indigenous people of this continent voluntarily. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, violence is necessary. And Malcolm X did the same thing. I knew who Malcolm X was before I knew who Martin Luther King was.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
if a person is violently oppressing you, violently exploiting you, it only makes sense to engage in revolutionary violence to
Mm-hmm.
counter this reactionary violence. And
Well, I
because,
know that
oh, go
just
ahead.
so you know, I know that you are from St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of the most hyper segregated, um, violently kind of economically oppressed communities within the United States. A
Mm-hmm.
community that the Michael Brown, the horrible tragedy of Michael Brown. How did that inform who you are right now?
Well, actually, I spent most of my early years. I lived in Ferguson until around '06, and
Mm-hmm.
um, so this was a bit before the rebellion. So,
Mm-hmm.
and if you know anything about the history of Ferguson, Ferguson used to be a sundown town. It did not become the black community that it is today. And even now, there's a black Ferguson and there's a white Ferguson. Like if you go to downtown Ferguson after the rebellion, it's rapidly becoming gentrified. You drive down, you can see expensive pipe shops, cafes, stuff like that. But you go to the area where Mike Brown lived, where Mike Brown's people lived, Canfield Apartments, a bunch of people just had to leave because those apartments were so vacant. I mean, not vacant. Of course, it's not gonna be 100% vacancy rate, but they were mold. There was mold. Like people were actually going through taking pictures of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and there are many, many, many issues that still are going on in Ferguson. It's still possible to be killed by the police in St. Louis, and the main
Mm-hmm.
thing that we as communists, we as revolutionaries need to be paying attention to is the day-to-day conditions of the masses when they are not burning things down. Because
Mm-hmm.
anybody that went through first will testify. Like, okay, all these white folks that came up here, they wanted to see us burn shit down. They wanted to see us Molotov this, that, and the other. And yeah, that's a rebellion. But the rebellion had reasons. And
Mm-hmm.
these reasons, the rationale behind these rebellions was not just the fact that they left his brother outside for 4 hours on the ground dead, or the fact that Darren Wilson did not get indicted. I mean, you can't expect justice from an injustice system. So
Mm-hmm.
when you have black people that work themselves to the bone and have to catch the bus to go to work, spend 2, 3 hours in transit to a location, then they get there, they catch hell there. There's no union there, and if there's a union, it's a sellout bullshit union. Then they come
Mm-hmm.
back, pipes bust, leaking through the roof, mold, no screen on the window. Somebody kicked the door in, still ain't been repaired. Yet the landlord still want to come looking like this every first of every month. That's the type of shit that starts rebellions. And
Mm-hmm.
as a Maoist, we need 2, 3, 30 million more Fergusons. But most importantly, we can't just have these disjointed things going from boom, 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 boom. Okay, here's Ferguson, here's Baltimore, here's Jacksonville, here's Atlanta, here's East New York, because they follow a pattern. Okay, burn shit down for a couple of days. National Guard comes, go home, you get shot. We have to organize people. We have to propagate and promote revolutionary theory. We have to follow the example of the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers was the number one revolutionary force in the United States ever,
Mm-hmm.
and they were destroyed by a toxic brew of internal contradictions that did not apply the principle of democratic centralism. And by democratic
Mm-hmm.
centralism, we mean democracy. That means you can debate behind closed doors until you decide on a line or a position that your organization is going to take on something. And once this line is determined through vibrant internal debate that can last 2, 3, 4 months, once you've agreed on this line, you uphold it in public. You can change it. The Black Panther Party did not really adhere to this that well. When Huey
Mm-hmm.
got to prison, before Huey went to prison, Huey was the boss. Whatever Huey said went. And that is not how you run a revolutionary organization. And they
Mm-hmm.
were not a communist party in the traditional Leninist sense. They were sort of intermediate organization.
Mm-hmm.
But the Black Panthers, we could do a whole episode on that.
Well, the thing is that, I noticed that some, not all, but some other, radical progressive people have had challenges with you. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think, while you're very engaging and people are very kind of like people are very drawn to you, you also seem like you have some people who are some critics. I mean, what do you think that?
Oh, I have more than critics. I've had people that have wanted to kick my ass. But
Yeah, yeah.
that's the thing. Like left politics in the United States, it's really sectarian. It really really does not like black people that do not let ourselves be goaded and led on by various white led factions. And I'm not gonna spend too much time on the Red Guards, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the stuff that around that comes from them. Um, they have the good points and they have the bad points. But my main thing was that you in Austin, Texas, or somewhere else are not going to tell black people in St. Louis how to run our shit. So that was the main
Mm-hmm.
rub between me and them. And then they wrote this really, really long thing, like calling me a revisionist or saying that one particularly interesting incident was that I got into it with this white woman on Facebook. And she was like, oh, blah, 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 saying something about, I can't even remember. But I think I said that hopefully your people will end up like the women in Haiti, and she apparently thought that I was implying that she should be raped in a revolution. So
Mm-hmm.
I was like, really? And this whole thing, like white people, even on the left, are scared shitless of black people that do not let them run us ragged. Like if I see you doing something fucked up, or I see you saying something that doesn't make any sense and trying to posit this as some sort of revolutionary line, I'm going to challenge you on it. I don't owe you a damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's been the rub between me and a lot of people. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot
Well,
of
I
people
mean,
make
go ahead.
a lot of people make the mistake of seeing the left as the revolutionary movement, and a lot of these sects, a lot of these factions, a lot of these groups and things, they might last 2 3 years and then fall apart because of their own stupidity. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a cycle. Like the same trend happened in the 70s with the new communist movement, which is sort of the first iteration of Maoism in the United States. And I'm more interested. A lot of people seem more interested in trying to relive those days.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more adamant on not reliving those days because those days were very, very traumatic for a lot of people. And the
Mm-hmm.
best thing that we had that came out of that, the Revolutionary Communist Party, ended up turning into a revisionist party because they followed the cult of Bob Avakian. So
Mm-hmm.
my goal, our goal as Maoists should not be to be Bob Avakian or try to uh, rehash what the Peruvians did in the United States, because the Peruvians who did forcefully present Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, um, as we know it today, before them, the Filipinos had basically come to the same conclusions in the 1960s. But
Mhm.
You cannot dredge up and dig up the past to apply to radically different conditions in the United States today. That's a form of
Mhm.
dogmatism, and that's a form of fetishization of the past. It is not going to work. If you try to make it
Mhm.
work, you're gonna get your feelings hurt. You're gonna be disappointed. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
cannot afford to be disappointed. As I said earlier, we're dying as a species if we do not get our act together. If we do not make socialism happen.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
And I
all of
have a
these
question in regards to. Go ahead.
all of these arguments with these people, they may seem to be like really, really important, really, really, but in the long run, they're not shit because the left in the United States, meaning the revolutionary left, the Maoist movement, is not giving leadership to uh, any broad segment of the masses in the United States. So we're sitting up arguing as if we've already taken state power. We have not. We're not even
Mhm.
we're not even 20 miles away from. We're not even 20 million miles away from taking state power. So until the goal of every Maoist in the United States should be to build a party and build this party on a solid foundation of mass work, not on a solid foundation of polemics that nobody reads, not on
Mhm.
a solid foundation or shaky foundation of self-aggrandizing statements that again nobody reads.
Mhm. Mhm. So, what is for the people? And I noticed that it talks about fascism rather than racism. Can you give me some information about what for the people is, and why in St. Louis you decided to focus more on fascism rather than racism? Is there does that mean anything, or is that just kind of like, okay, well, does that actually like something that means something in a deeper way?
For the People St. Louis is a part of the broader network of For the People organizations in the
Mhm.
United States. We have For the People organizations in Bloomington, Indiana,
Mhm.
uh, Omaha, Nebraska. We also have Omaha Tenants Union in Nebraska, in Omaha.
Mhm.
We have
Mhm.
a For the People in Atlantic City, and we have a For the People in Mobile, Alabama. And
Mhm.
there are more in the works. But the main goal of For the People organizations is to serve as a mass organization to actually, the goal of any mass organization is to involve the masses in it. And
Mhm.
not just involve the masses in it because we're not just about, okay, let's recruit buku people. Um, the main goal of any mass organization should be to organize the people around their interests. And you
Mhm.
can only organize the people around their interests by doing what we call mass work. Mass work could be anything from doing school supply and food distributions to um, helping mothers that are dealing with a racist administrator of the school, to
Mhm.
helping organize a tenant union at an apartment like Canfield Green, or helping build a protest against a cop that just shot somebody or a cop that tried to pull somebody off their front porch. Or there are many, many things that can be considered mass work. In St. Louis, we focus mainly on addressing the fact that North St. Louis, which is where a few of our members live, or North County or West St. Louis, a lot of these areas are food deserts, meaning that there are no grocery stores in these areas. There's a lot of corner stores that sell alcohol, uh, cigarettes, uh, sometimes even drugs. Like there's certain gas stations and corner stores in St. Louis they'll sell you a shot of Nyquil, and
What? Okay.
yeah, yeah, they
Okay.
sell K2s, that type of thing. And
Okay.
and but to your question on why we focus on fascism over racism, fascism in the United States is basically a uh, cross class collaboration to uphold the white supremacist imperialist order.
Mhm.
So racism is not just something that we could just see as over here or not tied into this broader superstructure of
Mhm.
ideological fuel that gives fuel to fascism. If you see a fascist in the United States, they're going to be racist, even if they're a black fascist. For example,
Mhm. Mhm.
if you're familiar with Sheriff Clark in Milwaukee, he takes many, many positions that are against his own people, and he's a black man.
Yeah, yeah.
So racism is not just something that's isolated. Racism is something that actually gives real material fuel to the material forces of fascism. Um, so when you see Donald Trump talking about how he's going to lay out concertina wire and send soldiers down here to stop this migrant caravan that's coming up here to basically try to address issues that are of the United States' own making. But when you see the Proud Boys riding around claiming that they're not racist, yet they say a whole bunch of stupid stuff and they jump and beat trans people and black people, or when you have when you see Sheriff Clark boasting about how many black men that he's locked up, or we see Sheriff Arpaio basically treating mainly Mexican Chicano people in Maricopa County, Arizona, as if they're some sort of cattle, making them live in tents in 120-degree heat. All of these things are interconnected. So we don't want to break up these things. Like, we're going to fight racism this one day, then we're going to fight misogyny this one day, then we're going to fight this the other day, and then we're going to fight this the other day. We say fascism is not necessarily a catch-all, but we're saying that we're here to address and fight the root causes of this, which is the capitalist imperialist system. And fascism is what is lending strength, or what many of these reactionaries that are killing us every day are using as their justification, consciously or unconsciously. When you see cops in LA that are walking around with Nazi SS SIG runes, or with swastikas tattooed on them, and even when you see a thin blue line bracelet, that's a sign that they're in a fascist brotherhood. So when we say fascism, if you don't know what it is, we're going to teach you what it is. Racism, misogyny, all of these things are fascist things.
So we have a question from the audience, and I'm going to kind of wrap it up into my question. Cole, what's his name here? Cole Malakowski is asking, I'm wondering if there would be a situation similar to the Paris Commune in the United States, North America, before the establishment of a worker state, almost as a precursor to what would come. And I guess my question would be, for you, who are the peasant workers in Maoism in the context of the United States? Like, who would be I don't know if that's kind of, we could wrap that into one question.
This is actually a question that I've gotten a lot. So, okay, I'm going to do Cole's first. But Cole, I really don't think that there's going to be a Paris Commune in the United States, because, I mean, there might be a similar situation, but this whole trend of, can we take this thing that happened in the past and make it happen in the United States? First of all, the Paris Commune failed. And there are real reasons why it failed, because they failed to address they failed to go all out. They failed to go on the offensive. And anything in the United States that we do is going to have to be on the offensive. Otherwise, we're going to lose. You can't just set up in a city like, okay, say you have a Detroit commune or a St. Louis commune. What are you going to do when the National Guard surrounds the city, starves you out, and starts launching artillery in? You're going to die. Unless you have prepared a fallback. You can't just sit up, and that's there's something that we call the October Road. Like, there's not going to be any insurrection in one or a few major American cities, because, okay, say you take New York. Okay, they're going to take it back. So what we have to do is we have to mobilize forces in what we call base areas. And a base area is an area where the forces of the reactionary state have been driven out. Police gone, military gone. And a lot of people claim that this has to be in a rural area. I personally don't think that's the case. There could be suburban, or there could be urban base areas. For example, Detroit, I think, is something that we really need to be looking at. Gary, Indiana, East St. Louis, places like this where the police don't go, that don't even have police departments. But there are still masses there. People still live there. Another area to look at is the South, because that's heavily black. If you I've gotten the book from Cooperation Jackson called Jackson Rising, and
Mm-hmm.
I recommend that all of your viewers get that because
Mm-hmm.
even though Cooperation Jackson is and the Malcolm X grassroots movement is not not an explicitly Maoist or a mass organization or anything like that, it's still something that has to be paid attention to. What are these new African people in the South doing to realize some semblance of self-determination? How can we apply this from a Maoist context? And I really, really admire the work of Cooperation Jackson and the Malcolm X
Mm-hmm.
grassroots movement. So, no, I really don't think it's going to be a parish commune type situation in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
That was almost 200 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And while we do recognize as the first example of a dictatorship of the proletariat, it was also a failed example. And we're not anarchists. Anarchists still lionize both Catalonia and the Ukraine, both of which were failed anarchist experiments. And we're not like that. Going to your question, Tika, regarding
Mm-hmm.
what is the peasant in the context of the United States? First of all, the United States, I'm pretty sure you're aware that the United States doesn't have any peasants. There are no peasant workers in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a really, really big case for the lumpen proletariat. And by the lumpen proletariat, I mean like people that are, for whatever reason, not able to fit the mold, if you will, of the classical proletarian. Like
Mm-hmm.
and I'd say that most black people in urban areas are semi-pro, semi-lumpen, meaning that,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you work at McDonald's and you sell weed on the side, or you work at
Mm-hmm.
McDonald's and you hustle bootleg CDs or something. Okay, hustling
Mm-hmm.
bootleg CDs, selling weed, that type of stuff, that's classically lumpen activity. Or say you work
Mm-hmm.
at a store, you work during odd jobs, or
Mm-hmm.
you work as a booster. And a lot of Marxists are really, really dogmatic on this because, yeah, the lumpen are a really, really politically uh, dangerous class, if you will, meaning that
Mm-hmm.
the proletariat, the working class, is still the only force that can lead a revolution. They have to be the guiding force. But
Mm-hmm.
if you follow Mao, who had realized that peasants were the driving force, meaning because, okay, the peasants comprised a massive amount of the Chinese population.
Mm-hmm.
So you realize that to make revolution in China, you're going to have to go through the peasants because
Mm-hmm.
China did not have an industrial proletariat. I mean, the only classically proletarian city in China was Shanghai. And you can't just make revolution using Shanghai. And the fact that the Kuomintang, or the sellout comprador enemy party in China, controlled the cities. So the communists couldn't work in the cities because they got massacred and driven out of the cities in 1927. So any work that the communists did in cities was clandestine. They couldn't just go out and lead a strike of 30,000 people because they get all these 30,000 people and some of their best cadres killed. So
Mm-hmm.
Mao went to the countryside because the Kuomintang did not control the countryside. And it was possible for a peasant army to operate and move throughout this area. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So going back to the United States, and Huey Newton wrote on this when he had developed his theory of intercommunalism, which I do not 100% agree with, particularly the part that nations are obsolete. Like Huey literally said that we are not nationalists because nations do not exist. That was
Mm-hmm.
sort of a deviation on his part. But I think the major thing that we need to engage with is in Huey's theory of intercommunalism is the fact that the black nation in the United States, if not globally, is lumpenized. We are able to
Mm-hmm.
get these jobs. Like all of these things are being mechanized, automated. Uh, like there is no real hardcore industrial proletariat. Like you can go work for 30 years, same factory type deal in the United States no more. That shit ended in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the factory workers nowadays are migrants or temps, temporary labor.
Mm-hmm.
Like you go to a
Mm-hmm.
temp service, you sit down and they'll get you a job at a factory or something like that. You work there for 2 or 3 months, no union or anything like that. So as concrete economic conditions of the most oppressed people in the United States change, we have to change with them. And this isn't revisionism. Revisionism is when you, okay, fuck all of this. We're going to go and gut mouth Marxism of its most basic principles. We're going to be, we're going to go run for office. We're going to go do this and that. We're going to go and just work for penny ante wage increases that'll be taken back within a year or so. That's revisionism. But you have to stay on top of things. And as concrete conditions change, you have to change with them. Otherwise, you'll be left behind. And that's the main flaw in a lot of these dogmatist arguments. They want things to be how they want them to be. This isn't 1978 anymore. This is 2018. And if you do not adopt the 2018 and you still want to act like it's 1978, you're going to be lost. So we have to pay attention to the lumping.
So what would you like to leave our viewers with as we wrap up today? Like what, I want to say, what are the steps to the revolution? Like what should we be looking at in regards to, what are the next steps for you? What are the next steps? What advice would you like to give our viewers?
Well, the first thing to do is become a Maoist. Like a lot of so-called Maoists, they act like it's some sort of hoop or sort of laundry list of positions that you have to accept. It's not really that difficult. If you study Maoism, meaning all of Maoism, not just a certain dogmatic strain that was popularized in the Andes and ultimately failed. Study the Philippines. Study Nepal and why it failed. Study India. Study the Black Panthers. Study the anti-colonial revolutions in Africa. I'm just going to tell you what Stokely Carmichael would tell you. Study. Well, Kwame Ture. He changed his name when he went to Africa. So study, study, study. And furthermore, don't just study. Don't just wall yourself up in a room with books. Take what you have studied, or better yet, study in the streets. Talk to regular people at bus stops. Buy a cheap pack of cigarettes. And if somebody, hey, bro, you got a cigarette? Yeah, I do. What do you think of so-and-so? How you living? What's going on? Learn how to talk to people. Do some mass work. Get 2 or 3 other people and find a problem in the community. Find other people in the community that say, yeah, this is fucked up, and solve it or work to solve it. And don't rely on the government to solve it. The government doesn't give a shit about you. Be your own government, meaning lay the foundations of socialist power in your community.
That's amazing. I have to say that, you're amazing. It's always good to talk to somebody, especially the thing is that, we talk to people from LA and New York, and, to talk to a native of St. Louis, of actually Ferguson, it's really refreshing to kind of, to your perspective, because we don't often hear from people that are outside the kind of more popular areas for the mainstream, or for white America, like, oh, they just go to Atlanta or LA or New York or Brooklyn. So thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate you. We appreciate your work, and we're looking forward to hearing other things that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tika. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.